Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders for coders about all aspects of creating your best life as a developer.
I'm Will, the accomplished developer and aspiring software architect.
And I'm Beej, the journeyman developer sharing my journey in development. Lots of developers, including Will, are going to tell you that they aren't very good at design. While that may be true, it turns out we all still have to do basic UI work in our jobs. Well, most of us do. Thankfully, there are some things you can keep in mind that will make this experience less annoying. In this episode, we're going to discuss some basic things that will help you be better at design while not going off into the deep end. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
Windows updates. Dude, they have pushed an update that has broken, well, a few months ago, they pushed an update that broke Bluetooth on my laptop and both desktops. This latest update has broken printing on all three machines. I feel like I'm losing the ability to use my computer slowly every time Windows updates. There are several thousand people having the same problem. A lot of people are losing time based on this. Honestly, at this point, with the way Microsoft is pushing their updates, forcing them out and not testing, I'm really hoping we have a lawyer out there that's looking for a good class action case because they need to get nailed over this. You know, every time I get my head above water, Microsoft pushes it back under. And it's ridiculous.
And this is why I'm switching to Mac. I already have it work.
Yeah, and this is why I'm looking at Linux.
Yeah.
For the same reasons, because I have enough hard drive space on my SSD. I can run Windows in a VM.
Yeah, that's what I do at work.
Yeah, and so if there's just something that just won't work, I think I could probably be okay. Yeah, I do think that if there are any lawyers out there that want to come on the show and talk about software liability and why this kind of thing is so common in the industry, I would love to hear from you. Also, if you nuke Microsoft from orbit on this one, you can come on twice at this point, because I will totally extend a hand on that one. In better news, I set up my first GitHub action the other day. So I've got a Gatsby site that I can push to master, and it goes out to, my site. So it gets FTP'd up. The web host is a little slow. You're familiar with that. But basically, I worked it out, and I think it costs like between 4 and 5 cents every time my build runs and pushes. And I'm not productive enough for that to hurt me. It's the best way to put that. So I'm pretty pleased with the way that GitHub Actions have worked out, and even my daughter thinks it's cool. Like, she watched me do it one night. She was just kind of asking what I was doing, and I explained it to her. She's like, "So where's this computer? Is that the one downstairs?" And I go, "No, I don't care where it is." Like, what about the computer that you're pushing to? Don't care about that one either. And that's just a really neat place to be. So how about you?
Dude, I am feeling the burnout, man. I'm just on too much right now at work. I actually told my boss I was feeling stretched a bit thin in my status report last Friday. And I love doing all the things. I get to do some really cool stuff. But being pulled in 8 different directions is just a bit too much. And, I don't know that it's exactly 8. It might only be 6 or 7, but still, that's too much.
Yeah. 2 different directions is too much.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, you're right. It's gotten to the point where I just don't care anymore. I mean, I'm at the point where I'm tired of being the only one fighting to do things the right way.
Yeah.
So I say, go ahead, test in production. I really don't care anymore.
Yeah. When you get to that point, that's a real good sign of burnout. It's not that you don't care. It's that at this point, you don't feel like caring helps.
Well, I don't have the capacity to care.
Yeah.
Is the thing.
You're drowning. You can't be a lifeguard.
Yeah. And I mean, part of it is just, I'm not the only one, but lately I've not been paired up with anyone else who also does things the right way. And so we've got pressure from upper management to do it the wrong way. And people who don't know better are coming and going, well, why can't we just do it this way? And I'm like, I'm tired of fighting that fight.
Yeah.
And, it should be, my management my lead developer should be the one who's stepping up and fighting this fight. And they're the ones that are not understanding why it's important. And I'm like, I'm done. I don't care anymore. Do it the wrong way. You're going to suffer. And that's on you, not me now. I'm just done with it.
Yeah.
Now, in better news or in fun news, I will be taking a couple of days off at the end of this week. Actually taking Friday, and then we just decided to take Monday. I'm going to be going down to Mobile, Alabama for Amanda's brother's wedding this weekend.
Cool.
Now, their dad hurt his back, so he can't make the trip down there. So I'm going to be streaming the wedding to a private group for her family who can't make it down. Mainly just her mom and dad who have to stay up here. But I think there's some aunts and uncles who aren't going to be able to make it. They'll be watching it as well. On the way back, we're going to be stopping in Birmingham to visit a few breweries. And actually, right before we started recording, Amanda and I were texting. We decided, hey, you know what? Going to take Monday off and stay in Birmingham an extra day and just sort of hang out. Because I just need the time off. I need a break. And that's how I'm going to get it, you know?
Yeah.
Speaking of breweries, I am drinking the new Happiness from Mill Creek. It's an Imperial New England IPA with Citra and Galaxy hops.
How hoppy is it?
It's not terrible. It's very citrusy. I don't know. The Galaxy hops aren't as bitter as some of the other stuff, and Citra is really common because it's easy to grow here in the U.S. and it's not as bitter as some of the other stuff that's easy to grow here.
Yeah, and stuff that's citrusy tends to cut the hoppiness anyway. Like it's not that it cuts it takes the edge off of it.
Yeah, it does. And so it's kind of got like a citrusy, creamy flavor. I'm not the biggest fan of IPAs, but Happiness has been one of my favorites. I was so excited when Amanda told me they were making it again. And she brought me this from their first canning. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the label. Personally, I think because it's got Galaxy hops, it should be more of like a space themed. But instead, they went with like, rainbow sherbet melted onto orange sherbet look. I don't know. It's here. Let me show you the can, and if I can slide it up out of the. It's like, here's what I'm talking about. Like, looks like rainbow sherbet melted.
It is
on orange sherbet.
Yeah, it does kind of look like a like an 80s kids TV show, like the way they describe a sick dream.
Yes.
Like when the kids got the flu or something, and that's like the color that's in the background. Yes. And he's like, right. Yeah, I see it, man.
Yeah, so I'm like,
it's good that we're talking design on that on here.
Yeah. I'm not the biggest fan of the label, but I do absolutely love the beer. I know what they're going for. They're going for like bright, happy colors, summertime, and then kind of citrusy type colors. And I'm like, no, you missed on that one. But I am looking forward to the next time I go out to Mill Creek. I get to have it on tap, and I've not actually ever had Happiness on tap. So, but it is pretty strong. I think around 8 or 9%. So high graph for a beer. But all that said, let's go ahead and get on into book club. The 13th quality of a team player is relational. In the 17 Essential Qualities of a Team Player by John Maxwell, he states, if you get along, others will get along too. And Maxwell starts off talking about Michael Devers. He was deputy chief of staff for Ronald Reagan. And he spoke to the fact that Reagan, while being a very shy person, had a way of connecting with people, even his opponents and, members of the press who disagreed with his policies. He was able to connect with so many because he genuinely liked people. He treated everyone with respect, no matter their position, if they were chief of staff or secretary or the janitor cleaning the floors. He treated them with the same level of dignity and respect. Now, Maxwell goes on to describe 5 ways to know you've built a solid relationship with your teammates. He states that everything begins with respect. You have to value each other. The next thing required for good relationships is shared experiences. Following that is trust, a foundation for leadership and relationships in general. Trust is very important for building those relationships. One way relationships are doomed to failure is when there is a one-sided relationship. To build a team, there must be a give and take relationship with each member on the team. Finally, teammates must enjoy being with one another to have a good relationship. Maxwell closes the chapter with 4 ways to better relate to your teammates. Focus on others instead of yourself. Get to know them by asking good questions about each teammate. Spend more than just work time with them, and make an effort to show them they are special.
So we've put comments and water bottles on hold for a little while. There's several reasons for this. The first is that we're out of water bottles. Beach shipped out the last of them past week. We're also kind of looking at, do we still want to ship out water bottles versus something else? If you guys have some suggestions, let us know. Keep it reasonable though, because there's not a whole lot of money sitting here.
We're paying for these ourselves, and with the little bit we get from Patreon. So
yeah, basically. So the other thing is we've not been getting a lot of unique comments on the website or on social media. We're getting a ton of spam, and the good comments we are getting tend to be from the same people that already have water bottles. So we're trying not to overdo it there. But if you would like a CDP water bottle or whatever the next thing is that we come up with, leave us a review in iTunes or comment on the website or on any of our social media. We also post all of our episodes to Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We're also on Instagram and Tumblr. Those latter 2 would be Beej, not me.
So I will say this. There's 2 ways that you can go with your suggestions on this. You could suggest something that is easier for Will to pronounce than the word water bottle.
Yeah.
Or you could do something that's even harder for Will to pronounce than the word water bottle. He struggles with it.
Like brewery.
We're not giving out breweries.
Here's your complimentary CDP Worcestershire bottle.
It goes back to that joke. This is really hard to say, man. Worcestershire.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys. If you like the humor, you can join the conversation anytime via Slack by going to slack.completedevelopernetwork.com. Your advertisement could be here. If you like the show and would like to advertise on here, send us an email to adverts@completedeveloperpodcast.com. We have short-term, long-term, and other sponsorship opportunities. Reach out to us and let us help you reach the people who you are serving.
Design tends to be kind of difficult for software developers, like marketing, writing, public speaking, music, art in general. Design seems to be an area that a lot of developers tend to struggle with, and they find it intimidating. There's a general perception that design people are naturally artistic, better at reading the somewhat ambiguous rules of design, or have their finger on the pulse of industry best practices in a way that the rest of us can't grasp. While these things can be at least partially true, there are a lot of things that even a non-artistic developer can do that will result in better designs.
If you're a developer who is somewhat intimidated by design, that is no reason to despair. While an increasing number of companies are hiring designers and using design systems to build up their user interfaces, in many companies, developers still have to design a lot of things. If nothing else, using good rules of design can allow your system to grow for long enough that a real designer can show up and fix or help you out with any deficiencies. Best of all, if you follow these design considerations, you'll often find that rather than immediately hating your work, users will actively give you good feedback that makes you better at designing. So in this episode, we're going to talk about why knowing design is important and why developers have trouble with it, and some of the advantages and disadvantages that developers have. Then we're going to get into some basic principles and some considerations and close out with some concerns that you need to have, and a few final thoughts and just stuff you need to know about when you are designing. So let's go ahead and get on into it with why is learning about design important?
Well, the first thing is there's not always a designer. Just a lot of companies don't see that it's important, or they think it's part of a developer role, or they don't even think that, ugly software is any worse than pretty software. The other thing is you may be on a team that doesn't communicate well with design. You probably have had the experience at some point, or most developers have, of either the design guy is really opinionated and abrasive towards the developers, or vice versa. And so those dynamics a lot of times are in place when you get there and you can't do anything about it. So you may have to be able to do a decent design just so that your stuff can get through, with the other team.
Have you ever been on a team that was managed by a designer?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a friend. We were hanging out over at their place. We go over there every now and then for game night. We end up just sitting outside and drinking beer and chatting recently, the last time we went over. But he's a designer, graphic designer, went to school for it, and now he's running a development team.
Yep. I would say that it's better now for that dynamic versus, say, the early 2000s. I would say 2007, 2008, that time frame, it was the worst. I worked in a situation where somebody did a design in Photoshop that you could not do on the web. You just couldn't.
Yeah.
The technology just was not there, right? You're talking, CSS floats and all that fun stuff. And they're like, why can't you do this? And well, you could do a table-based layout because, Photoshop will spit this thing out. And it's like, but that's not semantically correct HTML. And it's a site that's getting hit by search engines. It interferes with all the other design decisions for the rest of the system. And so, yeah, I've been there and done that, and it is not pleasant. Now, the other side of it is what happens to designers when they have a developer supervising them. I suspect that's probably a bit worse.
Yeah. So I think this was mid 2000s. I was dating a girl who's going to school for graphic design. And I know at that point they were teaching them like the basics of, web development.
Yeah. Yeah. But you had this massive hangover of people that learned design in the 90s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
From pirated copies of Photoshop or something. And then they're still using them years later.
Well, they probably learned design for print media. And I have seen that where someone would come in with a design and I'm like, that would make a great poster, that would make a great magazine cover. That will not make a good website at all.
With the 15 meg image, the background.
Yeah.
It's look, once you get that image onto paper, the paper isn't any heavier. But every packet from now on will be.
Also, the design mindset is more user-oriented rather than code-oriented, but it will improve the quality of your code that's powering the design.
Right, because it does force you to a lot of times separate things, because one thing that you'll see with most designers is they're kind of fickle, right? They change and they shift with different design themes and different ways that things are being done, stuff that they've seen. And so if you really, really tightly tie your processing code to your UX, which is a bad practice to get into, you're going to get nailed by this. And having designers in the mix a lot of times will force you to separate that stuff just because you're trying to isolate changes in the UI from your processing code. It pushes you towards best practices.
Mm-hmm. So why is it that developers find design difficult?
Well, we tend to focus on what we're trying to do, what we personally are trying to do with the software, right? Like the thing we're trying to build, rather than why or how someone uses our software. And it's a thing of, hey, I can break this thing down into steps and, work the algorithm, but it's not necessarily thinking so much about the person that is triggering that event to happen. It's just a different part of the flow.
Yeah. I mean, other than some UI developers, which UI specific devs, they're kind of like the DevOps, which is the operations developer blend. They're like the dev design. Divine?
Yeah, there we go.
They're divine.
You heard it here first, folks. We coined that phrase.
I'm sure Dave would love to hear that.
Wouldn't call it coining it so much as extruding it, but we'll leave that there. Speaking of extruding things, developers also have a tendency to be a little bit perfectionist. And a lot of times this means that we can't make a good enough design for us. So we'll go, oh, this is off by a pixel, or this doesn't quite look right. And we'll overly tweak it, because you can do that in code, right? But once you start doing UI and you start having things resize and you start having all the different browsers and all this other stuff going on, it's harder to do that. Like a lot of designers, they will go, hey, this is okay. This is good enough.
Yeah, that's something they had to learn, because I know a few designers who like it. I hang out with a lot of artists.
Oh yeah.
Some of them are graphic designers for their day job, and no, they are very like, especially when it comes to their own work, they're like, oh no, let me go in here and do this, and like I'm in the creative group at church, and one of the things that we get, I don't know, thrown at us, but like presented to us over and over again is, being is actually putting our work out there, because it's like, look, you guys are going to want to keep working on it, to keep perfecting it, and you need to put it out there for others to see and move on to the next project.
Right. And I do think that that's what designers have learned that developers haven't.
Yeah.
Right. Is they can get it out there, and it gets the feedback loop going. Whereas developers will sit there and we'll tweak code forever and never release if you let us.
Yeah.
And so design a lot of times serves the function of kind of putting the brakes on that.
Yeah. Another thing is, and this is something I'm very guilty of because I love theory. When we try to learn design, we tend to focus too much on design theory rather than the creation of useful stuff, useful feedback loops, that kind of thing. Like when it comes to my music lessons, that's one thing that really sold me on after my first lesson is I came in and I learned a little bit about guitar. Like I learned, a little bit of playing stuff, but then we spent a few minutes talking about music theory. And truthfully, he was just testing the waters because very few people actually care about learning that. So he just he tests the waters with every new student just to see, hey, are you even interested? And that's what hooked me with him as an instructor. Cause I'm like, oh, you're going to give me theory too. Theory's the fun stuff. If you outside of our realm of people, few people think that. A lot of people would rather learn the practical and not even care about the theory. But with developers, we tend to do that. And so when it comes to...
Well, our job is building castles in our head.
Yeah.
So the theory kind of matters to us. Like that's just how we approach things, which, it will mess you up as far as design, as far as design, it'll mess you up as far as playing a guitar. You don't think about where your fingers have to go.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're playing the guitar. You're not doing that.
Oh yeah. One of the big things I get told is because different chords start on different strings. So, some chords, they have all 6 strings. Some only have 5, some only have 4. And that's not even getting into power chords. But I'm constantly being told, don't look back at your right hand, because I can get the rhythm down and not have to think about it. But I'm always looking back to make sure I am on the right string.
Yeah. And it'll mess you up. So
I'm not, and it will. And, that's one of the things that I'm having to do. But it is. I would think it's similar with learning a language too.
Yeah. If you're thinking too much about, getting it all right versus being able to communicate, you won't do either. It's just, it hoses you. So speaking about doing this sort of thing, probably need to discuss some basic principles. And these kind of apply across the board, regardless of the design interface that you're building, whether it's web, even a console app, even a physical app. You're wiring up buttons and stuff on a panel somewhere. It's the same kind of thing. The first is that UX elements in your system should be predictable and consistent. Mm-hmm. I worked on a system for a while that the UI was not consistent. Every time they were like, oh, we're going to add something, it was added somewhere just where it would fit. We often referred to that as, we kind of had the Ezekiel's wheel of tabs. And so you have a form that's got tabs on it, and inside the tabs, there's tabs. And inside the tabs, there's more tabs. Like the running joke was, if this guy designed Windows, it would be called Tabs. It's the operating system, because everything was just kind of stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
And it ends up being where you can't reason about where something is likely to be when you don't know where it is. Because, well, some of the tabs were on the top, some were on the bottom. Sometimes it wasn't a tab. Sometimes it was a list that popped something up, and then there were tabs on it.
Oh my goodness.
It was really hard to navigate that, even for people that knew the system. They would ask, including the guy that wrote it. On occasion, he was like, "Where is that?" And we're like, "You wrote it." I don't know where it is. You don't want to do that because it makes it very difficult on the users. A second premise here is that your design should try to drive users to the pit of success and then push them in and help them avoid errors along the way. Right. So if a field is required and you're doing something with it on the next thing that you're going to, you don't let them not enter something there because it'll break the system. It's just basic stuff that you should know as a developer, but from a design perspective, sometimes developers will miss that stuff, because, the system allows this, but realistically, it doesn't really work all that well. Yeah. Another one that comes up is that the language on screens should be sufficient, short, and descriptive. So you don't use words with ambiguous meanings or with non-industry standard meanings. We had a couple of those at one of my previous jobs, and there was a system entity that we talked about, and it came up every day. Like, you're constantly dealing with this thing. It was 8 months after I got there before I realized what that meant.
Also, your screen should have a logical flow that matches the way that the user thinks about a problem, rather than the way the database holds the data or the way that the business logic in the API thinks about the problem. This is a weird one because you kind of need to get outside of your own head for it. I know we were building an application, and it's not that we had bad like product owner or subject matter experts. It's just that they knew one side of things, and like they knew like what they did on the business end. They weren't thinking about what their customers did and how they came into the system. And then we had someone come in, they hired someone who or promoted him, I don't know.
Right.
But they brought in someone, and he really helped us figure this out, because what happened was we built this based on what they were talking about, which was based on their paper form of doing it, which is what these guys knew really well. But when it really came down to it, like it made sense to us and to them based on the paper form and how they put data into the system. But when we're basically automating this form so that people could fill it out online. But when they started sending it off to some of their bigger users to test it out, we got a lot of feedback about it. It was like, we're having to change massive stuff. And that's why they brought someone else in who was like, could talk from that side of it. But yeah, because like, it was like, even the business people didn't know the logical flow of the user. They were thinking the logical flow of, well, how do we want to enter data in when it's on a paper form that we're typing and putting into the database?
Right.
Not how are they going to enter it because they have to go look up certain things and get like, reference information and stuff. So,
yeah. Well, my favorite one is when people decide that, okay, you're on this form and you're starting to enter data, and there's some lookup table that doesn't have something that you need, and you can add it somewhere else in the app, but they won't let you add it there. And so you got to navigate off and lose all the stuff you entered and go fiddle with it and put it in there and then come back. And then you get a little further down and there's another one. And that is unbelievably common.
Oh yeah. Ask anyone who's had to file for unemployment in the last few months.
There's not any of those people. I mean, that doesn't happen much, right? especially not with the current environment. There's no unemployment.
I've watched several people do that, like as in been there when it was happening, and they're like, I don't understand why this isn't working. And yeah, then you call the help, and it's like this. Like, literally, I heard the phone call as this little old lady, and I'm like, and it's not saying that old women don't know anything about programming, because I know some older women who know more about programming than Will and I ever will. But this was one of those people who did not.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can't assume that your audience
Right.
does have the same set of knowledge as you, right? So, like, if you ever want to get really humbled, watch somebody use software.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, you'll see stuff and you're like, I never would have thought anybody would do that. And designers think like that from the get-go. They're having to look at those kind of things and go, how is somebody going to interpret this word that you used right here?
Oh, yeah. I've actually seen a designer turned QA, and one of the most frustrating QAs I ever worked with, also one of the best.
Yeah.
Because she could, like, there were a couple of times where, like, we had to have conversations about, hey, that's not a bug because you disagree with the design decision that was made. You can address that, but you can't say it's a bug.
Right.
And that was early on when she first made the switch. Eventually it got better, but she would catch stuff that you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. How did you even know that, what do you mean that if I do this on a Turkish keyboard, it does this other thing? What, why would, how do you know that? Oh, you got one. Of course. Like, have you ever been to Turkey? Do you know anybody from Turkey? No, but I have the keyboard. Like, where did this even come from? And you look and they got a stack of them. They're just like, man, I've worked with one or two people like that. And you're just like, man, I don't even, we as developers can't think about that kind of stuff, right? Like we can think about error conditions. What happens if a file moves? What happens if permissions are wrong? What happens if the file's deleted while we're trying to work with it in some way? We think about that kind of stuff. These are the people that think about that kind of stuff for the UI.
Yeah. It's really funny because it's very different because they don't think about the stuff that we think about.
Right.
Like the ones I've talked to, I said, oh yeah. And by the way, I noticed this when I was in there fixing that bug, and I went ahead and took care of it. And she was like, huh? It's like, I never would have thought about that. And I'm like, yeah, but don't worry about it. It's going to work. She's like, how do I even test that? And I was like, all right, here's how you test that what I did worked. But yeah. But like she would come up with stuff that I'm like, I never would have even thought about that.
Yeah. Your designers protect your users from you.
Yeah.
And they protect you from your users.
Yes.
Let's let them do their job.
Yes, that is so true. All right. Lastly, under basic principles, you should use appropriate and consistent user interface elements based on the data that you hope to collect and how the user will interact with the system. For example, don't cram phone style controls on a desktop interface and vice versa. One of the most frustrating things I run into constantly is when I'm trying to fill out a form or something on my phone, and I go and it says put in the email, and it's the email keyboard where you get like you hold down the dot and it pops that stuff up, and it has the @ symbol on there, like on the front screen. You don't have to like click through to get to it. And then you go to the confirm email,
and it's regular text.
Yeah.
Yep.
That is the absolute worst. Like I have legitimately things that were not like something I had to have. I have stopped filling it out and did not buy from them and went and bought from a different company because of that.
Yeah. It doesn't take a whole lot, especially on mobile.
No, I'll pay $5 more for something if I don't have to deal with that.
I just feel like the other stuff that they're making, they're going to care about more.
Yeah.
If they get that right. And so I'm kind of right with you there on that one. So let's talk a little bit about color. This tends to be one of the main things that developers have a hard time with. And there's a lot of reasons for this. It's really hard to pick appropriate colors for a lot of developers. Like if you look at the way we dress, that's sort of a systemic thing. It's probably not going to get better.
I wear mostly black.
Yeah.
I kind of look like a designer.
Yeah.
Already.
There you go. You just got to get a turtleneck and some problem glasses and you're good to go. You already have the Mac, you're slowly turning to the dark side. The Apple will forever dominate your destiny or whatever. So one thing that we have to start learning to do if we want to be successful with color scheme type situations is to think of color in terms of hue, saturation, and luminosity instead of red, green, blue. And the reason is that colors that look very similar are often very far apart on RGB and they're not on HSL. And so if you use a color system that is built around how color is perceived by people versus how the software has to deal with the color, you're going to have more luck at going at being able to reason about the colors. Like, I mean, the other day I had to look up, what the RGB code was for orange, right? Like, if you think how long I've been coding, the fact that I had to look that up tells you that it's not necessarily all that accessible.
Oh, you know what? One of my favorite things to do is when people ask me my favorite color, give it to them in hex.
You would. Just give it in like the old school, like 16 color thing. My favorite color is 7.
There you go. Oh my goodness. We talked about color when we had our episode 256.
Yeah, we did.
No. HSL, I remember when I was first learning about that versus RGB, and like RGB makes sense to a developer mind.
Yeah.
Because it's literally the amount, colors
in a channel.
Colors are mixes of, when it comes to light, red, green, blue, and when it comes to other mediums, red, yellow, blue. But anyway, it's like the amount of red, the amount of green, the amount of blue. But when I started designing stuff early on, when I was training with you, especially when we had that one friend of ours who he couldn't tell us what he wanted, but he could sure tell us what he didn't want.
Yeah. At length.
Yeah. He's a great guy, but he just like he legitimately didn't know what he wanted. But when we present him with something, he's like, not that. And so I learned a lot about it at that point. And you're right, it's very good because then you can, when you're just looking at the numbers, you can really you can see how similar two colors are. So you don't want like a background and a foreground to be too similar.
Right.
Have you ever looked at something that was a light gray foreground on a medium gray background?
Yeah, we called it GeoCities.
I mean, I saw this meme the other day, and this was good. It's like, you don't want your user interface to look like the exit, like the X on a mobile ad.
Right.
Because they make it slightly off from the background color to make it hard to see.
Yeah. And speaking of hard to see, you also need to be thinking about things like color blindness, probably using software to actually test out your app to see what it would look like to somebody with different common kinds of color blindness. You'll see things that it looks normal to you, but it doesn't to somebody else. They can't see certain things. I worked with a guy that had, I forget what kind of, what the actual diagnosis was, but he had some kind of special glasses that adjusted it. And he was just like, man, this changed my life. There was just like a set of colors. It's not that he couldn't see those colors, but it's like it's like he lost contrast or something.
Yeah. They can't differentiate.
Right. And so it was messing him up because he was working on screens in our app that somebody wasn't thinking about that.
Yeah, they actually do have some really cool stuff out there. There's also some, I think Chrome, it may be Chrome. There's some browser.
There's a Chrome plugin or two.
Yeah, there's some browsers where you can do that, and it will actually adjust the colors to make them more visible based on the type of color blindness you have. That said, not everyone is going to know that. Not everyone's going to have that available to them. That's not going to be available on most of your mobile devices. So you're going to want to think about this. I know we had some issues with some of our logos. They had to be redesigned because of that. The other thing you want to do is consider adding multiple color schemes or customization, especially if your target market is going to really want that. For example, as developers, we love our dark mode.
Which, by the way, Chrome is getting built in. There's a flag.
Another thing you want to consider is how is your app going to look when a dark mode reader is applied to it. So I have had some where it really throws it off. Like, because some of them, they just invert the colors. Some of them, they darken the colors. Another thing you have to think about is a lot of those plugins and things, they change the background and the foreground colors, but they don't change images. But if your image is in the background and it's not like in an image tag, it's going to invert those colors, and those look really, really weird.
Yeah. And you also have to think about things like night mode.
Yeah.
So when they take the blue channel out, what does your app look like? Is it still usable?
That's a good point.
Yeah. Because I've dealt with a few of those as well. And I do that all the time at work when I have to get on a conference call, because everybody, it seems like about half the office, when they share their screen, it's like light mode, Visual Studio. And I'm in front of a TV. And so it's like somebody shining a flashlight into my eyeball.
It's weird. I don't know what software you guys use, but so you see the way I'm looking now. I look, my camera looks pretty normal. I've got the lights on in my office and stuff. But I don't know if it's the Mac or if it is WebEx, but when we ran into an issue with WebEx where when everyone started working remote, it kind of overloaded the server it was on. So we had to stop using video. But before that, I looked completely like whited out. Like it was, you could tell there was someone here, but it was just like, the white balance was so off and there's no way to control it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was like the camera with the Mac or if it was the WebEx software with my camera. I'm not sure what it was, but it was weird. And I'm sure it was blinding to people when I was speaking and like I'd pop up big on the screen because it's just like blinding white light coming at you.
It's like you went to the beach in shorts.
Yeah. Now I would try to wear like darker clothing so it wouldn't be as bad. But yeah.
So another thing you need to consider is typography. What fonts you're using, how you represent text, those kind of things in your system. Your design should generally have a visual hierarchy with a relative importance of elements denoted by their prominence on the screen. Now, you can do this with a lot of different things. It's not just font size. So the color, whether it's italicized, bolded, those kind of things, the placement of the item will also kind of contribute to that visual hierarchy. Things front and center are usually considered more important than things that are off in a corner, right?
Yeah.
Corner office is prestigious if you're in an office, but it's not prestigious on a website. If you're off in a corner pocket, it's because you don't matter.
And also you have to consider your user's medium for this. So I was reading an article the other day on my phone and it went fine. And then they had an image and then all the text was like overlapping for like 2 paragraphs under the image. And then it went back to normal until you hit the next image.
Yeah.
It's like the images, they didn't do that right. And it threw the whole thing off. I ended up stopping. Like I didn't read the full article because I'm like, I just, I can't.
I've done that a few times where I'll share it through my email and then read it when I get home and just email it to myself. But yeah, it's annoying. It
wasn't an important article.
Yeah.
It wasn't worth that.
Yeah, it has to be.
It was a sitting on the toilet article, guys. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So, yeah. Typefaces also should have really good contrast with the background of the screen. In other words, like you were talking about before, make sure the colors are different enough that they stand out so that it's actually readable.
Yeah, but not so different that they give people a headache.
Yeah, like black background and white text is awful. Actually, black text on a white background is too. You People typically take that down, and it's like a dark gray, and the white is usually like eggshell.
Yeah,
it's not actually pure.
The same with the black. If you do like a light gray on black, it doesn't look as, it's not as sharp. I was more thinking of like blue on red.
Oh yeah,
there is a big contrast there, but it ugh.
Or like the Windows 3.1 hot dog stand theme. You remember that?
Yeah.
it's like red and yellow. Where you're just looking at this and you're like, I would think a child designed this, but I know that a child would not do this to other people. Like this was a really cranky adult that was making a point, and it got into the product.
Or they wanted to, they made it available for people to mess with others. I mean, there's always that.
Yeah, that's what I used it for.
Anyway, no, what I was thinking about too was they have tools out there that designers use and that developers can use too. I didn't say this with the colors, but I should have. The color wheel. It's out there and it's very useful because it shows you colors that go together and colors that contrast and make a good contrast, and colors that don't make a good contrast.
Yeah, or colors that are complementary, so that it's not so much you're trying to get contrast, but you're trying to get two colors that serve different roles in the app but don't need to clash. Yeah, and there's a lot of theory there. And at some point, we'll have an episode on color theory because there's a lot there. Like I could have included some of that here, and it couldn't happen during this episode. Again,
developers, we tend to go way too far into the theory, and so don't worry, guys. We'll have an episode on color theory coming up soon. Hey, too bad you guys can't see my tattoo. It's very colorful.
Now, when you're talking about scaling elements, especially typography and those kind of things, don't increase scale linearly. So like if you have something that is 12 point and you want something to stand out from it, you make it maybe a 14 point. But if you have something that's a 30 point, you're not going to make something 32 points and it stand out, right? You're going to have to go up to 40 probably. So it's better to scale with something that's more like a Fibonacci sequence instead of a linear sequence. Because otherwise, as you scale really high up or really low down, it doesn't match, essentially. Like it doesn't look like what it should.
In that mid range, you can go up or down like two font sizes and you can see a difference.
Right.
But when you get to those extremes, those really small or those really large, you have to jump drastically to see a difference.
Right.
Yeah, and there's actual theory behind that too, but we probably won't go into that.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of basic biology, right? Like you're supposed to notice that there's a large animal right there, right? And it stands out from everything else, but you're probably not really built to notice the difference between two dinosaurs so much as, hey, that's bigger than the tree, versus, it's 0.5% bigger than the other dinosaur. It's like, you don't care. It's big. Right? Like we're not built for this kind of thing, right? So you have to kind of play with that, our perceptions in a way that it actually makes sense.
And there's theory behind why it makes sense. That's what I was getting at. So.
Yeah. Better theories than the one I just offered.
Probably. Yes, they are.
But use mine because it still works.
And Will's a little bit conceited about it.
Well, a dumb idea that still works is not a dumb idea.
All right. So we've hit at this a little bit too, talking about some other areas, but image considerations. Images should be there for a reason other than decoration.
Right. Just like a random image of a clown on your blog. Like, why would you do that unless there's a reason for it to be there? Like, actually think about why the image is there when you put it there instead of just sticking something there. Images should, generally speaking, be relevant to what's occurring on the screen. This is why we have icons, right? This is why we have logos, all those things. That just makes it all flow together. It also keeps people from looking at it and getting confused about what that screen is supposed to do for them.
Yeah. I mean, images are great for breaking up large chunks of text.
Right. They're serving a purpose then.
Yeah. But the thing is that you don't want to just throw in a random image to break up text. You want a related image. Sometimes you get some news articles about tech and you're like, what? Because like,
yeah, where did this image come from? Like, how many guys in hoodies do you have pictures of? With the crazy bright screen where like their face is illuminated, like they got a 400,000 candle power spotlight on their face, and you're like, nobody codes like that. Anyway, that's one of my rants. Speaking of something to rant about, use images that are of an appropriate quality for the medium in which you are going to be putting them. Don't use grainy, low quality images. It makes you look awful.
Unless you're going for a grainy, low quality image look.
Right.
Like I was like, I read that and I'm like, yeah, but I actually know some pages that do that on purpose. It goes back to the reason.
Yeah.
They actually have a reason because it goes with what they're talking about.
Yeah. The thing is don't try to innovate unless you need to innovate on stuff like this. You know, like you need to be at a level where you can innovate rather than just randomly doing stupid crap and seeing what sticks. You also should consider things like having several sizes of the same image and making your displays adaptive so that you don't waste bandwidth, but you do have sufficient quality.
Yeah.
One thing that gets me like on the screen I have here is sometimes I'll pop open the web browser and I've got it on full, like literal full screen, you know, with the 4K monitor that's 48 inches. I forget how big it is now. And you notice spacing and image things very, very quickly on sites for that, because a lot of times they're thinking, oh, people just read on their phone.
Yeah.
Well, I might not. And so it'll jump out. So it's good to have multiple versions and be adaptive so that you can deal with those situations.
Next, layout considerations.
Yeah. Use common patterns. This is like design patterns in software. There are things like this for design. Things like the Holy Grail layout. You know, that's where you got a header, footer, left and right columns, and then the middle part's got your stuff in it. It's the important stuff. Like that. That's extremely common, and everybody understands that on the web. So it's fine to use that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's that or variations of that where, you know, you have header, footer, and
one sidebar.
Yeah, but like that is like Will said, that's very common, and it goes back to what he said earlier about like avoid innovations unless you really know what you're doing
and you have a reason for them.
You're going at this from a usability, so you want what is familiar is usable, even if your innovation is actually more intuitive. Like it goes back to like I have tried for years to convince Will to switch over to Mac Minis for our recording box. It's like a dedicated recording box with a Mac Mini. He is so familiar with Windows
and Linux.
Yeah. He won't switch over to Mac because it's unfamiliar, even though it's more intuitive. Once I learned it, it's way more intuitive to me. And to most people, like once you learn it,
that seems like a strange definition of intuitive, but okay.
I realized after I said it, like, no, once you learn it, it's more intuitive. Like once you learn the thought pattern, you're like, oh, whereas with Windows, I'm like, well, I don't know.
They might have done it this way, or it might have been in Windows 8, or it might have been Windows 10, or it could be left over from 3.1.
Yeah. And so,
and they're definitely very odd sometimes.
So like having that familiarity where it's like, even if your thing is more intuitive, it's like, this makes so much more sense to have it laid out this way. If people are familiar with another way,
your way isn't going to be taken up more than likely.
Yeah.
Similarly, within your app, you need to have structural things that make sense. So, you can use similar elements of structure across pages or across screens or across whatever design surface you have. Remember that being original is only good at the top level. If you're original on every form in your app, that's called inconsistency. That's not originality. And you're going to confuse your users. Don't do that.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot.
I've built a few of those. Another thing, consider working with a grid layout tool of some sort. It makes it a lot simpler to reason about things. When you go, hey, I have 12 columns and infinite number of rows. How am I going to lay stuff out instead of, oh, I need to be this many pixels over? It's no, it's in this column to this column.
Yeah. I mean, that's why stuff like Bootstrap is so popular, because both of these, partly because it's common patterns, it's things people are used to seeing, but also like we have on our website, our theme it's not Bootstrap, but it has a Bootstrap style grid pattern.
Yeah.
So when I'm putting stuff up there, I can easily go and just be like, class grid, and like put in the size that I want, like how much of the page I want to take up with that. And the cool thing about that is it's like these grid layout tools are dynamic.
Yeah. They'll scale. They'll let you say, okay, this element, if, I'm on this size screen, needs to be underneath this other one instead of to the right. Like you can do a lot more with those kind of tools because they're built for that. They're built so that you don't have to think.
Yeah. So you don't have to write the CSS manually to do that.
Yeah. And test it.
Because I've done it. I've written the manual CSS for that, and it is not fun.
Yeah, I have too. And the thing is like you can, even if it is fun to write it, it's awful to test it. Right? Like you want somebody else to have that problem. Huh?
I did not find it fun to write that.
Well, I'm just saying, I didn't find it fun either. I'm just saying that, like, if there's a theoretical person out there that enjoys it, it still sucks to test it. All right. I wasn't like trying to make a statement that, like, oh, this is something I want to do. No, it isn't. It's like, dropping a hammer on your foot hurts less if it's a smaller hammer. That doesn't mean that you go out with a ball peen hammer, just, chucking at your foot all the time. Like, that's not what we're saying.
But there are some people who enjoy that.
Yeah. And they can't count to 20 anymore.
Finally, under layout, when scaling layout elements, use the same type of Fibonacci style of increased size, because that's going to make more sense than the linear one. It goes back to the same with we were talking about with your text. Like, at the mid ranges, smaller increases are going to be more noticeable, but at the extremes, at the very large, at the very small, you're going to have to jump more to make a noticeable increase or decrease.
Yeah. So let's talk about some other concerns as well, just to make sure that we kind of wrap this up neatly. One thing, limit the amount of crap you put on a screen. It may be cool to make an app that has high information density and looks like the control panel of a space shuttle. To try to use that is not a whole lot of fun. Don't do that. Also, don't be crazy dynamic with your layout unless it's actually needed. Reflowing the design can be really annoying, especially on older machines, less powerful machines, machines with a slow network connection. And it can also cause errors where somebody clicks on the wrong thing and the stuff moved under the mouse.
You also want to make sure and add IDs to everything relevant on the screen. In addition to being able to address individual elements via CSS, this also makes it easier for other tools to interact with your system, like tutorials. I have no idea what Pindo is.
Yeah, we use that at work for it's basically a tutorial thing. So you can attach stuff to elements, it'll pop up and keep track of whether they've seen it.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we can, I know when we had Amy on, we talked about the differences between IDs and classes.
Also, be aware of things like metadata for the elements that you're putting on screen, so that people using assistive technologies can get a good experience as well. This is something that gets missed a lot by developers. Sometimes designers will pick this up. If you want to be good at design, you probably should as well.
No. So guys, while you may not ever become a truly excellent designer, there's a lot to be said for a developer that can use basic design principles to produce a decent UI. Following the considerations outlined in this episode will make your user interfaces much better, while not requiring an undue amount of work on your part. Essentially, this is the 20% of the work that will get you 80% of the results. Pareto principle. These simple principles will make you a far better designer than many of the developers with whom you interact. And who knows, once you get some basic principles down, you may find you actually enjoy it. That pretty much wraps us up. Before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, I want to add something that I think we kind of bounced around a little bit in here, but not enough maybe. When you want to learn something, try to show up with table stakes. And what I mean by that is rather than simply showing up knowing absolutely nothing and asking questions, show up having done some research and having learned some basics on your own. Because, I mean, there's always a starter tutorial for everything, right? So go do that. And then once you have that knowledge, then go ask questions. You know, for instance, I'm in a lot of Russian learning Facebook groups, and there are posts, 2 or 3 posts every day asking really simple things like, what does the Russian alphabet look like? How do I say hi in Russian? Like, if you're asking in a group for that, like that's not the right thing to do, right? You should go and learn some small, simple stuff first and then show up with real questions. It makes people more willing to help you. People will trip over themselves to help somebody who looks like they're headed in the right direction versus somebody who did a low effort, no effort thing and they just showed up and they want something from you. People get really frustrated with the same questions over and over again. So learn how to figure out what table stakes are for the thing you want to learn. Go do that and then show up with them. And that will get you way further than anything else. That's pretty much all I got. If you have a question or comment, please email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed through Creative Commons.
The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up for weekly emails with extra tips and insights, be sure to check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with news about the show. Catch us each week as we broadcast live, talking about what's going on in the tech world and answering listener questions.
Learn more about all of our shows and groups by going to CompleteDeveloperNetwork.com, where you'll find links to Junior Developer Toolbox, Developer Launchpad, and our other communities. Thanks for listening. See you next time.